All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Kayla. How are you doing today?
Hey, nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Really excited to just chat with you and learn a little bit more about your story and your practice. And as I was saying before I hit record here, I think that there's just so much that we can learn by hearing other people's stories and just kind of digging into their private practice and their business and just growth or mistakes or whatever it is. So I'm really excited to learn a little bit more and. For those of you who don't know, I worked with Kayla on a website redesign of her group practice website, and just through our time working together, got to just see a little bit more of like your growth. I think even halfway through the project, you're like, "Hey, we opened up a new a new office. Can we add that to the website?" Like,
And I
okay,
doubled
sure.
my staff. Can you add all these therapists,
Yeah.
please?
Right. Yeah. So I was like, okay, so here is a practice owner who is uh, obviously has some vision and goals for her practice, and things are moving and shaking and growing. So let's see what we can learn from her, and I know a lot of people listening will learn a lot. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's so important when for entrepreneurs because I think entrepreneurs are really visionaries, but usually we have all of these ideas, but we don't maybe sometimes take time to slow down and listen to other people's mistakes that they've learned so that we don't have to make them ourselves. So I
Right.
think it's so cool that you're sharing other people's stories because there's a lot to be learned and you do not have to make all the mistakes. You can learn from other people's mistakes and
Right.
save yourself some grief.
Yep, absolutely. And I always learn a lot from these conversations myself, even though my business is not a therapy business. Just talking to other business owners is always just so inspiring for me. So, well, introduce yourself and let us all know who you are and what you do and where you are and all that sort of good stuff.
Sure. So my name is Kayla Reilly. I am an entrepreneur. So I was raised up north and by a long line of entrepreneurs. So like my grandfather owned a plumbing company and my grandmother ran cottages on Cape Cod. Like she lived in a house and there were cottages all around this little
Awesome.
cul-de-sac. And so she would clean them and that's how she provided for the family. And so of course, my mom is an entrepreneur. My dad is one as well. So I knew from the get go that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't know how that would look. And through my own kind of situation and upbringing, I found a therapist, and they ended up saving my life. And I got really into like the human health and services field. So when I was in college for business, I think I was in for business administration or something like that.
Okay.
And I was in a politics class and I was in a politics and economics class, but then I took a psychology class just for fun.
Uh-huh.
And I found myself despising the economics and the politics
Mm.
class and really gravitating towards psychology. So, long story short, ended up becoming a therapist, but I always knew that for me, it would turn into a business.
Yeah.
It's funny. I don't know if you've ever read Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I read that last year and it blew my mind.
Awesome book. Awesome book. So he says to mind your own business and that your job is not your business. So for me, being a therapist was my job, but my business was entrepreneurship. So like owning and
Hmm.
changing hands in investments. So um yeah, the therapy field for anyone who obviously you are speaking to an audience of therapists. So when I say this, no one's going to be like, oh my gosh. But the field is really shitty in a lot of ways. Like therapists are not respected in the agency world, and neither are clients in a lot of ways. So I find that agencies really have this churn and burn mentality instead of valuing that we are healthcare providers, just like a doctor, just like a
Right.
dentist, just like, so from my perspective, there needs to be a bigger shift of what therapy is, a change in the way that people view mental health treatment.
Yeah.
So That was another big driving factor for me, is that I wanted to create a company where not only were clients valued and mental health treatment was excellent, but that
Mm-hmm.
therapists felt valued and therapists felt like, they were being treated as a clinician.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really beautiful because I think having that really solid why you're doing what you're doing in your business, that trickles down and that affects everything, from you as a leader to your team and the type of business you create.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yeah, that makes me think of like Simon Sinek's work of what's your why, identifying your why.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
such good work. Well, and the funny thing is, I think that this is maybe a controversial thing to say, but it is what it is. Therapy practices are businesses,
Mm-hmm.
just like medical practices. So there has to be this combination of business mindedness and also a focus on healing. So I think a lot of times healers, the biggest mistakes that we make as healers is treating our business as a healer instead of treating our business as a business.
Yeah.
um, that's a really challenging, so that's probably the hardest learning lessons I've had, was making the shift from making decisions emotionally and from a healer's perspective to looking at numbers and making decisions based on the health of the company.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's a good segue right there. I want to hear a little bit more about, okay, you had this why, you sort of had this draw to entrepreneurship because of your family and your upbringing. You fell in love with psychology in college. So how did that all look getting into starting a practice
Okay,
in
so
this the early days?
the early
Take
days
us
of
back.
Kayla, not that far back. Um, it hasn't been that long. Yeah, so I first went into, like everybody does, agency work. So I worked in day treatment, which was, if anyone knows what that is and has worked in day treatment, it's atrocious. Like, I had tables flipped, I was being punched in the face by
Mm.
teenagers, like they were taking turns spitting in my bottle. So I had to go get STD tested because,
Oh, wow.
these teens are spitting in your water bottles. And it's just, so I went from graduate school thinking, wow, I'm working my tail off. I worked myself through college. Um, so I worked my tail off thinking, oh, yeah, once I get into the field, like this is going to be awesome. I'm going to be a respected member of the community. No,
Yeah.
no, not in the mental health field, anyways. So I went from day treatment to intensive in home, which is equally as hard and challenging. It's great work, but I think there's a devastating lack of clinical oversight and training.
Mm.
It's probably the hardest population and job to work for the most inexperienced, unsupported clinicians. So you're just out of college, you have no idea what you're doing, and you're doing probably the most intense work
Yeah.
you'll ever do in your career.
Yeah.
So from there, and I hope everybody else resonates with this, because every clinician that comes on board at my company is like, I know I can resonate, like it's terrible. Uh, but from there, you kind of climb up. So I ended up, Medicaid in our county wanted to bring in MST, which is multi-systemic therapy. It's an international, it's a lot like intensive in-home in that it's a community-based service, but
Hmm.
there's a lot more clinical oversight. So like, instead of a team of people working with a family, it's one clinician working with the family. And instead of working with just the youth, they work with the parents to do parent training. So
Hmm.
it's a lot of systemic, like family work. And then there's a lot of oversight. So there's clinical supervision from a supervisor. And then the supervisor is also being overseen by another clinician. Anyways, so I ended up kind of climbing the ropes pretty fast in that, but it was a brand new company in the area. So they wanted me to not only supervise the clinicians, but they wanted me to market and make community relationships and develop kind of like a brand in the community. And so I was wearing all of these hats, being paid pennies.
Yeah.
And I realized, wait a second, if I can do this for someone else's company, I can definitely do this for myself.
Right.
So I shifted gears and started working at night in just like a little rented room. I rented my supervisor's office in the hours where he wasn't there,
Mm-hmm.
and he was generous enough to let me do that. And so I kind
Yeah.
of started to dip my toes into private practice, and then from there ended up renting more offices until I was full. And then I realized that I wanted to do something bigger. So like I could only help so many people if it was me providing practice, but if I could open the doors to a group and train other clinicians to
Yeah.
value themselves and value their clients, then I could help a lot more people.
Yeah. And how long did that take to go from that dipping your toe in the water, private practice, to I'm going to start taking on clinicians and start leading?
So I'm a crazy person. I am a wild person. I did it in a year.
Okay. All right.
But it was nuts. Like I was seeing 35 clients a week. So I was scheduling about 42, seeing 35, and I was opening the doors to my practice in the nighttime and weekend hours. So my poor husband, thank God he stayed with
Mm.
me. I was I was working all the time. But from my perspective, I knew it was going to be a big push
Yeah.
um, for a payoff later.
Yeah.
So I would say that to all people who want to kind of either start their own practice or who are in the works of it, that it will pay off and you will systemize yourself out. But in the beginning, it is going to take a lot of. Um, I just see businesses as like babies, but it's not a
Mm-hmm.
really good way to conceptualize it. But in the
No,
beginning, they
I
really,
see what you're saying. I resonate with that too.
right? Like you
Yeah.
need a lot of TLC in the beginning.
Right. Yeah. And then they start walking and things they can do on their own. And that's when the systems come into place and you kind of can step back just a little bit
Yep.
and lead a little bit more, lead a little bit differently.
And just like, just like with a kid, I think that it comes into its teenage years and you have to step back and not be the parent
Yeah.
that's looking to stroke your ego, but let them be their
Yeah.
own thing.
Let them fly.
Let them fly, let them be their own little selves. So I'm
Absolutely.
definitely in those stages now where my business is going to college, I think.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What was what was the so we talked a little bit just to go kind of back to what you were mentioning about wearing that sort of clinical emotional helper hat versus the entrepreneur visionary hat and kind of learning to walk those lines. How has your role changed from those early days when it was just you kind of figuring out and learning your private practice versus building a group practice? How has your role, responsibilities, tasks, stuff like that, how has that sort of evolved?
Um, so I think it's almost like mine went slower, and it's probably a mistake. So if I were to go back and do it all over again, I would have done it faster. Um, the number one important thing when you're trying to grow group practice is recognizing the value of your team and investing in your team members to be autonomous and make choices themselves. So I made the mistake that most entrepreneurs do, which is I wanted freedom so that I could grow, work on the business instead of in the business, but I also
Right.
wanted control. I wanted it done a
Right.
certain way.
Yeah.
So you can't have both. It's a spectrum. So if you want autonomy, then you have to develop and support your team to become free independent agents. And
Hmm.
you have to let them fail. So I think
Yeah.
that's where I started. Was I started hiring admin, and I did it the wrong way, but if you're listening, you should do it the right way. Uh,
That's why we're
is
here.
Yeah. So what the best way to do it is to invest a lot of time in developing them as a team member and cultivating their confidence, and then backing off and letting them fail. So what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is when they're coming to you to make the decisions, instead of answering it for them and spoon feeding them, which is actually exhausting as an entrepreneur, as a leader,
Yeah.
you have to start saying the one liner, what do you think? What
Hmm.
would you do? How would you solve
I
this?
do that with my
So
3-year-old.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, teaching them to be a thinker instead of a
Yeah.
dependent.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's really where it starts. And then from there, like if you can free up some of your plate, like for example, online stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you can free up some of your plate by having someone create a really beautiful website. Listen, Daniel, you do this for a living. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. It's better for me to invest my time in what I'm good at, which is systemizing, than for me to try to be stumbling and making my own website.
Right.
It I love Mike McAllowett's writings and everything
Yeah.
he does.
Yeah.
And Adrian Dorison runs, is the co-founder of the Clockwork system. She's coming from, the big corporate world. So I love her idea that that you have to delegate, and delegate is very different than giving someone tasks. You have to delegate outcomes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then once you can delegate outcomes, then you free yourself up for time that's more valuable to you. So like, I love this idea that she has, which is like calculating how much your time is worth. And you calculate how much your time is worth by thinking about what your ideal salary is, and then dividing it by how many weeks you want to work a year and how many hours you want to work a week. And
Yeah.
then that dollar amount is like how much you're worth. And so for me to make a website, it probably would have taken a whole lot of hours versus just investing in somebody who knows how to do it well.
Yeah.
That way I can kind of take my time and do something different. So that's like the long-winded way of saying my tasks have evolved, or my responsibilities and roles have evolved because I've been delegating out marketing. You got to think about like bookkeeping, tax thinking, learning numbers. I think I spend a lot more time looking at my numbers and crunching numbers now than I ever did before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you have just recognized what you're worth, where your value is, and really the things that only you can do, like you maybe could have tried to build a website, but you could pay somebody far less than your hourly wage to
Yeah.
to create an amazing website, and they're a professional and can help accelerate things in your business too.
Totally, totally. And I love that idea. And that's always the standpoint I've had in my company, is that we're a team.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that you got to think about it too like this. If you're a therapist and you're working by yourself in a little office and you're just seeing your own clients, you're wearing all the hats. You're the
Right.
marketer, you're the receptionist, you're the biller, you're everything. That is really exhausting and
Mm-hmm.
lonely.
Yeah.
Versus if you have a group and you've cultivated a really cool team, or a really good, strong team. I know that Kelsey and my team has the billing. If anyone has questions, she knows more about the billing than I do anymore because she's good at it. It's her
Yeah.
strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I just think that having a team, even the things that you outsource. So for example, I have, I don't pay like a bookkeeper in my company. I just outsource it to a local bookkeeping company.
Mm-hmm.
And I consider them part of my team. When I have my quarterly meetings or my quarterly planning sessions, I
Yeah.
call my bookkeeper and I call my CPA and I call my payroll person, and I kind of look at things from their lens too, because they're going to provide me information that I wouldn't have seen because I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
trained that way.
Yeah. That's awesome. What do you think is the key to hiring the right people? I know this is
Mm,
it's a big question, but
that's the hard. I feel like that's the hardest part of business, is hiring the right people and not overpaying people.
mm,
I think we have a tendency, especially as healers, we want to make people happy. We want to make them feel taken care of. But
yeah.
so knowing your numbers is really important. And then from like a team building perspective, I highly recommend the book Ideal Team Player. So Ideal Team Player says you should look for three things in a team member: somebody who's humble, hungry, and smart. smart, like people smart.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually just had an example of this where I hired somebody and they're in the way of transitioning out of my company because they are way too hungry and they're not smart at all.
Mm.
So when people are one over the other, they're not really good team players. There might be really great clinicians out there. There might be really good admins out there. But
Yeah.
just because they're good at what they do doesn't mean they're a good team player.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important lens to nail down now and to reach out to people like I think it took me 3 years before I ever hired a business coach, and that's one of the biggest mistakes of my career was thinking I could bootstrap it and do it on my own without any outside perspective.
Yeah.
Um, Coaches, even though coaches like website developers, people who really know what they're doing in specific fields are invaluable to you with growth.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit to marketing because that's kind of my world. That's what I love. And as I
Yeah.
mentioned, we worked together on your website redesign, which I must say is what has been one of my favorite projects that I've done so far. As far as just, I mean, you were a stellar
Oh,
client. I
good.
must say, like
Thank
anytime
you. Thank you.
anytime I emailed you, like, hey, we need this or we need that, like you right away, you gave us what we needed to make it happen.
Oh,
But
good. You
I
guys were
also,
fantastic too. I loved it.
thank you. Well, I also love the finished product, obviously. Um,
Mhm.
uh, it just kind of makes me laugh that I just said that because I wouldn't want to build a website that I wasn't proud of. But but your practice website, I really enjoyed that project and what came out of it. So I want to hear a little bit more about how you view marketing and maybe start with the question
Mhm.
of what has been some of your um, the which marketing tasks have been some of the have had the biggest impact on getting new clients, seeing the growth? Like, what do you feel like you really got a good return on your investment throughout your practice history for marketing?
Yeah, so if you think about the culture in the world is changing so incredibly rapidly and drastically. So from my perspective nowadays, the website is an extension of you and your brand. So I love the description, and I don't know who this is from, so I do not mean to be stealing your idea. This is not an original, a Kayla original, but I love this idea that a brand is how people think and feel when they think of your business.
Mm,
So when I have a client that walks into our office, I want them to feel taken care of and comfortable, and I want them to know that we're trendy but professional, that we're approachable but really really good at what we do. So if I was sitting here practicing by myself in this little office, I could probably reach what, 3 people in the street that pass me a day versus I think an online presence, and that I think starts with your website. The website is an extension of what used to be just your storefront. Your storefront was how you appealed to clients in the olden days. Well, now it's
mm,
your website. Man, when I go to a professional like conferences or something, I'll meet a bunch of people and I'll get their cards. And then you know what I do at night? I surf their websites. That's the first thing I go look
yep.
at is I stalk their website. And so from my perspective, my website is an extension of the being that is my company.
Yeah.
It's the storefront.
Hmm.
So when you think about your sales funnels, um, every single thing in terms of marketing that you do should be returning people to your website. And so your website is the number one thing that should be like flawless. Listen, if I have like a social media graphic out there that isn't that great, that doesn't bring me any kind of anxiety. But if my website looks somehow unpolished or off brand or isn't functioning in some way, that brings me a lot of anxiety because
Yeah.
every single thing I have that's a branch out from that tree is bringing you back to the trunk of the website.
Right. I love that. That's such a good philosophy, and it was very clear to me early on when we started working together that you understood branding, because you
Yeah.
you, you gave us a huge Google Drive that had photos that were already approved that fit with your brand, and I was like, this is great because it
Yay.
makes our lives easier as designers and developers,
Yeah.
to choose from photos that you've already approved. You also had some of those social graphics you gave us, and all of it worked together. And it was like
Yeah.
everything that Evolution Wellness, anything that you see from them, it's all going to work together. And so kudos to you. And it was
So important.
very clear that you got that. So I appreciated that.
Well, and it's funny that you say that because that's also a learning lesson I think that you learn with your company with time is one of the first things you should do for yourself is create a vision. And in your vision, you should ask yourself, what do I want my company to like say to people? And I think
Yeah.
that's where branding comes from because if I want people to know that we're young, fresh, but professional, that's going to inform my color scheme, which is going to inform my photos, which is going to inform my, so it just
Yeah.
all kind of trickles down from that. And
Yeah.
I think the website is like the portfolio, the like
Yeah.
best of the best, which
Yeah.
I thought you guys really encaptured that. I think on our website, it's very, very branded, and I love that about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, what made you decide to invest in a website redesign when you did?
Numbers. So once upon a time, I was an idiot and I hired one of these appealing marketing companies because I was like, oh, yeah, I could pay this marketing company. I think it was like $1,000 a month to create and develop my website and do my marketing. And then it's easy, right? I can just offboard it and not think about it.
Right.
And then but then when I was crunching numbers, I recognized that one, the website I wasn't super happy with because it wasn't branded. They didn't give a lot of time into like, they thought that they knew better than what I knew for my business.
Hmm.
So I think that's
Yeah.
really important when you're shopping for somebody to develop anything for you, like branding, your CPA, your bookkeeper, anyone that you're outsourcing things to should be appealing to what is your vision? What do you want to see happen?
Yeah.
It's like throwing a wedding and then the caterer tells you no, we can't have mac and cheese because that's trashy. It's like, no, I want mac and cheese at my wedding. So bye.
Right.
Right? Same thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so from my perspective, when I was looking at the website and I was looking at the numbers, the budget was higher. So one of the best things I ever did was learn about percentage of top line revenue. So if you use QuickBooks or something like that, QuickBooks can run a report for you that will show you each line item and what percentage of the top line revenue you're spending. So I didn't want to spend over 5% of my top line revenue on marketing. And I was maxed out in the budget and I didn't have any wiggle room to go in any other directions. So, for example, for me, I wanted to hire someone on my team to be a marketer. So I wanted someone to like be in part of the team, like snap pictures of our new therapist and take a
Yeah.
picture of, but I couldn't afford it because my budget was maxed out on a website management. They were doing some Google ads too. But I started doing research about more affordable ways to do it. And what happened was I wanted to redesign the website, but the company wouldn't let me take it.
Hmm.
So I was in this huge battle with them about taking my website with me because I had paid, this is going to make you really nauseous, people, but I paid like over $17,000 to this company and they
Oh.
wouldn't let me take my website.
Ugh.
So,
Ouch.
ouch is right. Kick in the nuts. So
Ugh.
I started looking around for website developers because I really wanted to know that I could own my product that I paid
Yeah.
for.
Hmm.
And that was really important to me. And another thing that was important to me was SEO
Yeah.
services. Because I think there's a lot of website developers out there that'll design a really great website, but they don't know anything about SEO.
Hmm.
And I think that's really
Yeah.
important when you're establishing your website.
Yes.
Um, and I wanted someone who gave a crap about my brand, which
Awesome.
ultimately led me to you because you had all three of those. You were like, listen, you own your website. I'm going to give you a training at the end of this project.
Yeah.
I want you to inform how the content's written. I want your voice to ring through. Um, and I know SEO, and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. I do remember having those early on conversations before we started working together, and that resonated with me a lot because we get a number of practice owners who come to us in the same sort of situation where they're like, I built my website, yeah, I didn't know better, and now I can't use the content on it, or I can't make
Mm.
the changes I want to make to it. And so, yeah, I am, personally really big on, I just don't want to hold someone's website hostage. Like I wouldn't want that to
Oh my
happen to,
God.
my own business. So,
Can
we
you
are,
imagine? Like, that's like having someone build you a house and then say, "Oh, well, no, you can't like live in it." Like,
right.
no, like we
Yeah.
own it. And it's like, wait a second, what? I designed the thing, I paid you to construct it. What do you mean I can't move in?
Right. Absolutely. That's a really good analogy. Yeah. Yeah, so that's super important that if you need the help, like we are here to help you, but also if you're the type of person who just wants full control and even wants to get into the website and make changes yourself, like that's totally cool with me.
That's another thing that drew me to your company is so when you're shopping for a website developer, so the things to think about from my perspective is do they care about your brand? Do they know SEO? And then what was the other one? Oh, can you own your website?
Yeah.
Another thing that I hadn't thought about, but that really appealed to me about your company was that you have different levels of support.
Hmm.
So, from my perspective, as I evolve the business, there might be times where I need more support, and then there might be times where I need less. So, when you're shopping around, a lot of times there's like this flat fee that companies have of like, this is the level of management you can get. And it's like, well, wait a second, different companies at different stages of their evolution are going to need,
Right.
and I love that about your company that I can kind of, take the support as I need it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly why we do it. Like there's people just all across the board. Some people, we are their go-to website update support company. So they just email us and we make changes on their website. Other people are like, "Hey, I've got 3 changes I want to make this month, but I probably won't make any more changes to my website for another 4 or 5 months." And I'm like, "Okay, that's cool. Like we can help you out and get those changes made, but you don't have to be on this like monthly retainer unless you want to be."
I love that. So awesome. It's so important for entrepreneurs too to have that kind of freedom and flexibility with
Yeah.
companies that you're outsourcing to for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. I love your answer to that question about like it was all about numbers. Like that is just such an important lesson. Like know your numbers because that really
Oh,
helps you know what you can afford and how you can increase your profitability, which gives you more
hmm,
freedom to then invest into the things that are going to continue to grow your business.
big time.
Awesome. And I had another question, but you answered it. I was going to ask, like, what do other practice owners need to know before they embark on a website project? But I think you
Yeah.
kind of already answered that. Well, with the things that were super important for you. Any
Yeah,
other
I
any
would
other things that come
definitely.
to mind?
Yeah, I would calculate like, another thing to think about too is like, so from my perspective, the percentage of top line revenue is really important. But when you're going to build a website, you want to think about a long term budget as well. Because, for example, obviously, when I purchased the website development from you guys, 1 month didn't cover it, right? Like it was more of an investment.
Yeah.
However, that investment over time is actually going to reduce my monthly budget significantly.
Right.
So I think the website ends up paying for itself in 7 months with what it was saving me from the other company. So
Right.
for me, even though it was a huge initial investment, it saved the dollars over time. So
Right.
I think that's another thing that might be helpful when thinking about
Yeah.
making a big investment like that, is looking at like finances over time.
Yeah. And also to that point too, it's not only what comes to mind for me, it's not only what you saved in those marketing dollars from that other company, but if things are done right and we're really focused on those conversions, it's adding more business into your
Yeah,
company. And
yeah,
I have fun geeking out over those sorts of numbers when you're just like, okay, if you get 125 an hour, for one client, you add two clients per month. I'm going to butcher the math over, if I just try to freeball this, but I sat down and I was doing this with my wife, like using her as an example in her practice. And I was like, man, in like a year, you can add like 18 grand if it's just adding like one or two clients a month. And that's it, if they come a certain amount of
totally.
times, like all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, that's amazing.
It really is. Well, and I think that's something that not a lot of practice owners understand is, and I say this like, marketing is so intense these days because a lot of it is done digitally, and digital marketing is very, very different than community marketing.
Yeah.
So, in digital marketing, there's so much to understand. I would highly recommend doing some kind of research before you hire somebody because, like, for me, for example, I knew SEO is valuable, but I didn't really get one, what it was, and two, the kind of the metrics, like how many people, how much it actually was bringing me in business. So then when you break it down and you start learning, there's so many resources out there where you can like join like a free email list and learn about it. And with information, you have power to make better decisions for your company. So I think we were looking at the metrics, and I think it was bringing me like $2,000 a month in marketing, basically, that I didn't have to spend on Google Ads. So if you think about it that way,
Wow.
you can kind of look at how many, what do they call it? See, you know the terminology better than me, like natural or
Organic,
organic.
organic
Thank you.
traffic. Yeah.
I knew it
Yeah.
was something.
Yeah. Versus the paid traffic from Google Ads. Yep.
That's a really great
Yeah.
metric to look at.
Yeah, that's one of the, I mean, we don't do Google ads. I know other people who are much more skilled in that. But that's been my philosophy, why I love SEO so much, because it really is it's a long game,
Mm.
and it takes a little bit of patience, but if done right, it it's brings you exponential traffic and traffic for free once you get going, and sort of the snowball effect sort of starts to happen as you get more content and it all links together, and Google sees your website's been there longer and you're ranking for these things. It just keeps growing and growing.
Love that. Yep. And so, yeah, as an entrepreneur, if you can understand that, even if you don't have the time to do blogging and interviews and YouTube videos and all this stuff, to outsource it to a company like yours, for example, to do SEO services for you is truly worth the investment. It really is.
Absolutely. Awesome. This has been a great conversation. I know we can kind of chat about this stuff forever, but we gotta land the plane here. So I'll ask one general wrapping up question here. What are you most excited about right now?
I mean, I'm going to Wyoming. I know that's not like a business, but I'm
That's
going
cool.
to Wyoming. And listen to this, while in Wyoming, I signed up for this dog sledding excursion.
Oh,
So you
cool.
get in a dog sled and they sled you up to the top of the Teton Mountains in Wyoming.
That's awesome.
So excited.
That is awesome. You have to let me know how that goes, because that's totally
Will
something that
do.
my wife and I would do. Absolutely. That's so cool.
I'm thrilled. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I love talking numbers with you, Daniel.
Yeah. Thanks so much. This has been great. I know I
Sure
learned a lot, and
thing.
I'm sure everyone listening has learned a ton from you. So, where
I hope
can
so.
people find out about you and your practice and what you're doing? Where can they go online?
Yeah, check us out at evolutionwellnessnc.com to see Daniel's amazing work, him and his team, and learn more about us.
Awesome. Thanks, Kayla.
Thanks for having me. Take care.